Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector. And is Nintendo gonna start pulling out some of its big guns in order to drive more traffic to their online service? What do I mean? Well, I'm talking about the games that you're able to play through the Nintendo Switch online service. Now, we've got a lot of games that are available for the Super Nintendo, the NES, Game Boy Advance, N64, right? There's a good number of games, but I don't feel like Nintendo has really given us a high number of, I guess what you would say is Grail type of games or highly sought after games that would be extremely expensive to obtain physically. We haven't seen a lot of that. We have some. I'm not saying that there aren't any there, but what I noticed with the um, announcement of the GameCube release, in terms of the GameCube expansion pack being available on the Switch Online service, I noticed that they are going to have some more of those expensive titles. When you think about like Pokemon, Gale of Darkness, like coming straight out the gate with a game like that, that's a very, sought after game. It's a rare game and it's a very expensive game. And it has me wondering if Nintendo plans on doing more of that with their Switch Online service. Now, the thing with the GameCube is that it's different from, I guess you would say, the NES and like the Super Nintendo, in that there are a lot of GameCube games that are pretty expensive. I don't think the GameCube library, and I don't know the numbers on this, but I don't think the GameCube library is as large as, say, a NES library or a Super Nintendo library. And because of a lot of the sustained hype that's been around the GameCube, it's probably a lot more likely that the games that they do make available on the GameCube expansion pack is are those games are probably going to be games that would normally be a lot more expensive if you were to try to obtain them physically out in the wild. And so I think that, with what Nintendo is doing, it's very interesting to see if they start to add more of those hard to find games to the Switch Online service. I can already think of a number of games that I would love to see them add to all of the different expansion services that they have, from the NES to the Super Nintendo to N64. There's a number of games that I would love to see. And it's been a while since I've actually gone in and looked at all of those services to see what new games they've added. But for the NES, I would love to see games like Bucky O'Hare added to that service. That's a game that I've always wanted to play and experience. I've never owned it physically. I've never emulated it, but I've heard a lot about it, and it seems like a game that I would definitely want to try out. When I think about the Super Nintendo, I would love to see Hagane added to that service. I would love to see SWAT Cats and Arrow Fighters and there's so many Super Nintendo games that are like grailed games or highly sought after games. And I think that, Nintendo would do themselves a favor if they did start to pull out some of these big guns and add them to the Switch Online service. Especially when it comes to the Super Nintendo. I mean, you think about all the games that you have there, Captain Commando. There are so many like rare, expensive games that we just don't want to pay the money for, that I think would do great. Think about all of the Mega Man X games, Mega Man X 1, 2, and 3. Those would be great games to add. What about Castlevania Dracula's Curse? You know, so many games that I think, would be great. If you think about the N64, Conqueror's Bad Fur Day, that would be a great game to add on there if it's not already on there. Like I said, it's been a while since I've looked at these libraries, but you start to think about some of the more expensive and rare N64 games. It would be great for us to be able to check those games out. Even when it comes to the Game Boy Advance, you know what I mean? And the original Game Boy. There's so many titles that I think Nintendo has under their belt that probably aren't like their AAA titles, that I think would do well. Now, One might say that there might be licensing issues that would prevent them from being able to put some of those games on their service. And if that is the reason why they're not able to put some of those games on their online service, then I guess I could understand that. I understand that there's difficulty with, getting the rights or the license agreements to actually add probably some of these games to their online service. But, when you start to think about the limitations that you have there from a licensing perspective and things like that, I think it's those notions are the things that drive physical collectors to say, you know what, I'm just going to keep my physical games because, if I have it physically, I don't have to worry about license agreements and I don't have to worry about, permissions and rights and time frames because, some of these games that we see brought to an online platform, they're not just put there in perpetuity. They're not going to stay on these platforms indefinitely. I feel like a lot of them, if not all of them, probably have some sort of expiration date. The good thing is that with the Switch 2 being announced, obviously it basically gives a new lease on life to pretty much all Switch games, all things Switch, including the online service, and everything that's incorporated with that. Nevertheless, I mean, you still could see games get pulled from the eShops, from the expansion packs or the expansion services. We could still see some of those games get pulled depending on whether or not, agreements are sustained, if they get pulled, if they get canceled. And I think that's some of the uncertainty that a lot of people get nervous about when they think about, some of these games that are being brought to these online platforms. All that being said, I still think that it would be a really cool thing to see for Nintendo to pull out the big guns, pull out these games, pull out these really rare titles that, a lot of us may just have never had the chance to experience growing up. And now that we want to experience them now, getting them physically is next to impossible. And, you know, uh, having access to them in this online format would be great. Like I said, of course we can emulate, but having the ease of use to just play some of these games in the online expansion pack, I think that would be great. So I would love to see Nintendo do something like that. Also, another thing that I would love to see Nintendo do is, you know, I know that Nintendo already has access to some of the Sega Genesis library, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's an expansion service for Sega Genesis through Switch Online. What's preventing Nintendo from getting access to like the Sega Saturn library or the Dreamcast library to bring those expansion services to their online platform? Like, what's holding them back from that? If someone knows and you can explain that to me down in the comments, I'd love to hear it. But how sick would it be if they added, say, like Sega Saturn, and you were able to order like a physical wireless Sega Saturn controller to play some of those games through their expansion service, or even the Dreamcast? Like, how wild would that be? I don't know if it's impossible. I don't know what would hold them back from that. But again, if some of you gaming scholars have that information, let me know down in the comments. And also let me know if you would be interested in seeing Nintendo pull out some of those heavy hitting banger titles and add them to their online service. I'm interested to know your thoughts, and I will catch you in the next video. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.